We can help people change unwanted behaviours and problems in minutes that used to take months.
This is compounded for anyone with mental health conditions. So how do we best cope with these feelings and deal with potentially prolonged isolation in a situation that you can't control?
Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. And how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. We're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as if it was happening again. So, some people, after an event like that, are literally re-experiencing it 100 times in one day. And this is a crazy thing because what it does is it activates the survival gene. And when you're in survival, what you want to do is make sure that that doesn't happen again. So what you start to do unconsciously is you start to begin to forecast what you'll do if it happens again, right? And you start selecting a worst case scenario in your mind. And then you think, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you start to even make it even more, you get more creative, right? And every time you do that, you start experiencing the emotion of that future based on the pain of your past, the fear of your past, the anxiety of your past, the depression of your past. And so the person's conditioning their brain and body into the past, and at the same time, they're literally bracing themselves for the worst case scenario in their life, because in survival, if you prepare for the worst, there's better chances of survival. And you could have 10 really great things go on in your life, and you could have one bad thing, and you keep focusing on that one bad thing because you got to be prepared for it happening again. So people unconsciously then spend their whole life looking around the corner, waiting for it to occur, and they're on guard. Now, that's not a conscious process.
Common in PTSD from soldiers.
So
they're
common.
Constantly looking for the roadside bombs, and they're highly elevated, and it's very it's unconscious.
What they're doing is when you're in that brainwave state, you're sweeping your environment to determine if there's anything out of order. And you're doing that because the brain is on such an aroused state. In survival and stress, the brain is in a very alert state, and the brainwave patterns are high beta. You're super aroused, you're super alert because you're vigilant about one thing out of pattern that looks unusual or unrecognizable. And the moment you see that, it's that thought that opens the door to the conditioning that you've been creating all along. Remember, this is not a conscious process. It's no different than ringing a bell and watching a dog salivate. The stimulus is also causing an autonomic, physiological, chemical change that's taking place in the person's body. And that person literally, from a biological standpoint, is back in that event.
Right.
And they're going to behave in almost the same way that they did then because they're trapped in survival. You've stopped evolving. What we're saying is that if you can't overcome that emotion, then you can't create anything new because that emotion is keeping you tacked to the past. What we know, according to functional scans, is that talking about it helps to diminish some of the emotions, but it doesn't really change the brain or body that much. You can talk about it, you can have some insights, but until you begin to make fundamental changes, you're not going to go anywhere. We also know that when a person is in an environment that's remotely familiar to the event, even to the smallest measure where they can associate something, a small little trigger, they're going to have that same emotion consume them, literally consume them. So there's been great research done on different energy psychology techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. I've seen the scans. People will begin to recall the event and the emotion starts to lose its charge. Now, a memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. Now you're free from your past. The meditation, a lot of times, when you can give people the proper instruction and set up the conditions in their environment where they feel safe enough, that for me, it's never about the event. The event is incidental. It's about the emotion.
Right.
So then when you start lowering the volume to that emotion and you teach a person how to get beyond their analytical mind, enter the operating system where those subconscious programs exist, change their brainwaves, and begin to make significant changes. So the moment you give your power away to some person or something, the stronger the emotion you feel, the more you're going to pay attention to that person. And where you place your attention is where you place your energy. So it makes sense then that every time you say, I am this way because of something out there, you're unconsciously signing up to be a victim to your life. And yet, when you start taking time away from your life and retreating and changing how you think and feel, now this just isn't a panacea. That doesn't mean you do it and then you get up and you get on the freeway and you start cutting people off. You're doing it to change your brain and body to stay in that state of being. 30 years of doing this, nobody changes until they change their energy. I know that. And when you change your energy, you change your life, and it is like magic. So getting people beyond their habituations, their hardwired attitudes, their emotional addictions, and causing them to step into the unknown, that void, the biological, the neurological, the chemical, the hormonal, the genetic death of the old self, and says, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? What behaviors do I want to demonstrate? The act of closing your eyes and rehearsing the behaviors you're going to demonstrate in one day begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like it already happened. You are priming your brain and those circuits in your brain to begin to think that way or to act that way. I started becoming fascinated with the idea that you can give someone a sugar pill, a saline injection, or perform some false surgery or treatment, and a certain percentage of those people will accept, believe, and surrender to the thought that they're getting the actual substance or treatment. And they begin to program their autonomic nervous system to make the exact pharmacy of chemicals equal to the substance that they think they're taking. So then it begs the question, is it the inert placebo that's doing the healing, or is it the body's innate capacity to heal by thought alone? To me, we've done extensive brain scans. I now know people can change their brain in 1 hour. I've seen it. I know what a mystical experience looks like in the brain. I know how to induce it because we've studied it so much. I know when a person is in the midst of change, we can predict when it's happening. I know that people can begin to regulate emotional states and sustain them, that it can become a skill. We now know that genes do not create disease. Less than 2% of the people on the planet are born with type 1 diabetes or sickle cell anemia or Tay-Sachs disease. The other 99 to 98% is created by lifestyle. You can get two identical twins with the same genome. Why does one die at 57, the other one die at 85? Well, different environment, different perception of the environment, different behaviors, different choices. And the other thing is that most people live by the same feelings every single day. People wake up in the morning and your brain is a record of the past, so you wake up and you start thinking about your problems, and your problems are connected to certain people and things at certain times and places. The moment you start activating those circuits of memories related to the past experience in the environment, you're thinking in the past. Because every person, every thing, every place has a neurological network in your brain because you've experienced it. The end product of an experience is an emotion. So when you start thinking about your problems, you start feeling the emotions associated with them. You start feeling unhappy. So your thoughts are the vocabulary of your brain. Your feelings are the vocabulary of your body. How you think and feel creates your state of being. So most people start their day, every single day, reaffirming their entire state of being in the familiar past, in doing that in unconscious and habitually. So then they go through the same routine behaviors that they've been doing for the last 5 years. In their habitat is reinforcing their habits. And they're going through a series of unconscious choices, behaviors, experiences, and emotions. They do that for 10 years, they're on autopilot. And their body's dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past, and they've, in a sense, lost their free will to a program. Crisis trauma, disease, diagnosis, betrayal, wakes people up from the program, right?
Okay.
So I assert if you're not in the present moment, you're running a program. So if a person's living by guilt and they don't know it's guilt because it just feels like they've been feeling that way every single day or suffering, and those emotions are driving their thoughts, and if they can't think greater than how they feel, and feelings and emotions are a record of the past or thinking in the past. Now, if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny,
which most people do agree.
Well, yeah, so then your past is going to be your future.
Right.
We can, in fact, there's no magic there. You're going to lift your past up and set it on your future, and it's going to be a predictable life for most people, right?
Right. But most people want to break that.
Of course, they don't understand the formula, they don't understand the technologies.
The brain is the chemist. And you go, yeah, but what chemicals should the brain put into the blood? It's making the culture medium. I go, oh, it's based on the picture in the mind. I go, if you hold a picture of love, I can tell you what chemicals you'll release. Dopamine, pleasure. Yeah, being in love is pleasure. I can feel it. Why? Chemicals coming out of the brain. Oxytocin, bonding. The one that gives me that pleasure I want to bond with, so oxytocin comes in and now I'm directed to bond with that person. Vasopressin is another chemical released in love, makes you more attractive so you keep your partner around. And growth hormone, which is what it says, growth. So when you fall in love, the cocktail of chemicals coming out of your brain are things that enhance your vitality, your life, make you healthier, happier, and joy. I go, the same person, if they open their eyes and see something that scares them, none of those love chemicals are going to come out of the brain. At that moment, stress hormones and inflammatory agents are going to be released by the brain. All of a sudden I say, well, then you change the chemical composition of the culture medium. I go, yeah. Result? The composition of the culture medium controls the fate of the cells. The composition of your blood controls the fate of your cells. The composition of your blood based on the picture in your mind. Change the picture, you change the chemistry. That 95% of our behavior is coming from subconscious. If 95% of it is coming from my invisible programming, I'm going to pass on the family pattern unconsciously 95% of it. 95% of your life is coming from the subconscious. Shrink and psychology stuff, you just look at your life and say, where am I struggling? Because wherever you're struggling, inevitably is a program in your subconscious that does not support that.
Something called HEBS now, H-E-B-B-S, that's now studied the detrimental effect of talking about something every week for years. It's like opening a wound over and over again till you get septicemia. You know, when you keep discussing your problem, you keep it alive, you keep reliving it, you just never get better. It's like if you went bankrupt and every week went to talk about what it felt like to be bankrupt and to lose everyone's money who invested in you, that sense of shame never goes away. I mean, you should talk about it, but then you should get over it and then you should move on. And I find many people will say like, well, you know, when I was a baby, I was a preemie and my mum had to feed me through the dropper of a pen, and if I didn't gain weight, I would have died, and that's why I'm obese. I'm like, but that was 45 years ago. I know, but do you see that by telling this story, you're justifying every day why you eat too much? Sometimes you have to just put that away now and say that was then, this is now, and stop living in the past because it's gone. But the way you feel is down to just two things: the pictures you make in your head and the words you say to yourself. And you can actually just say the words, because the words you say create a picture. But the very good news is you can change those words at any time at all. Any time you can change the words. And I realized that you need to know three things about your mind only to make your life a masterpiece. One is that your mind does what it thinks you want, and it bases it entirely on the words you say. And when you say that's killing me, it will say, let me give you a lovely ulcer, so you don't go to that job that's killing you. The second is that it responds entirely to the pictures and words. And the third is we are wired, hardwired, to keep going to what's familiar and running away from what's unfamiliar. And you have a 2-year-old and you'll know. Nature's so clever. At 2, that's the age when a kid could walk out from the tribe and pick their own berries and put poisonous stuff in their mouth. At 2, they only want what's familiar. I want that cereal in that bowl with that spoon, and nothing else will do. And so only wanting what's familiar kept us alive. We didn't live in a walled village and wander off to another one and go, hey, I need some variety in my life, because they might eat you. So we are hardwired to stay with what's familiar and to resist what's unfamiliar. That's a fact. And they're always depressed because they let in criticism and they reject praise. And I have to make them go, okay, this is really easy. You're going to let in praise and reject criticism. You're going to, when I say I love your movie, you're going to go, thank you. I loved making it. Wasn't it amazing? I couldn't say that. Of course you could. It's just repetition. The mind learns by repetition.
So NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Neuro as in neurology, linguistic as language, a way of communicating, and programming, just as a computer has programs that it runs to do the things it does. We learn to tie our shoelaces as a kid or shake hands, and then we store the program, if you like, the habit, in our unconscious mind. So next time, we come to do it, we don't have to really think about it, it happens automatically. And some of the programs we have support us, and some of the things we learn in early life don't support us, they're dysfunctional. And so using the NLP technology, we can literally reprogram ourselves to be more functional. Because I believe that success and happiness, they're not created they're not accidents, that sort of just randomly happen to some people, not others. I believe they're created by certain ways of thinking and acting. And so everything that you do, from boiling an egg to making $1 million, comes down to your neuro-linguistic programming. And in NLP, one of the applications we use is hypnosis. So NLP was created by Dr. Richard Bandler, Dr. John Grinder, and they studied a number of brilliant therapists and eminent thinkers, people like Gregory Bateson, Milton Erickson, widely accepted as the world's greatest clinical hypnotherapist in his day, Virginia Satir, the mother of family therapy, Fritz Perls, Gestalt, and a whole host of different brilliant minds. And they created this technology that's often been described as a sort of a psychology technology, a communication technology, but it's much more than that. Using NLP, we can help people change unwanted behaviours and problems in minutes that used to take months.
Is it true we're only born with 2 internal fears, and everything else we just build up through the way we're brought up by our parents and by the world?
It's sudden loud noises and falling. So if something goes bang, you don't think, oh, should I be frightened? You jump, yep. And the others are learned. So if they're learned, they can be unlearned. And we use NLP to help people, say, with phobias. I mean, years ago, it used to take psychiatrists about 6 months to cure a phobia using systematic desensitization. Now, most phobias are less than 60 minutes. Psychological technology has dramatically improved in the last 20, 30 years. We've had all kinds of amazing advancements. We've just made a massive advancement in the treatment of PTSD.
Well, that's the thing about having a memory, is that you remember stuff. And good stuff happens to you and bad stuff happens. And in fact, the intensity of the memory, that particularly bad stuff is somewhat easier to remember, and particularly good things. And it has to do with the size of the image that we make, the impact it has upon us viscerally. That part of how we think is through the entemic nervous system, all the connections between the hollow and solid organs in your intestines. And psychologists like to call that feelings. But it is part of how we think. And so therefore, if you look at big bad pictures from the past, they will make you feel bad. And like I said, if somebody thinks about it 2 minutes here and 3 minutes there and 4 minutes there, what amazes me is when I asked an audience, like the class that we had downstairs, how much time they spend doing it. That, in this class, somebody said 8 hours a day. I mean, that adds up to an enormous amount of time in the next 10 years. I mean, an hour a day, we're talking 3,600. But if you multiply that by 8, we're talking north of 20,000 hours that, in a year that they're spending just thinking about the same thing. And it's not that they're doing it voluntarily, they're doing it habitually. going through it again, was kind of a foundational thing with psychology. They believed if you understood how you got your problems, it would sort of magically disappear. And the concept of insight began with Sigmund Freud. And even though it was carried out different ways in different psychotherapies, it became a thing where when people would go in, they would have them relive problems to try to get rid of the pain, but it really only reinforces it. The cortical pathways that we grow millions and billions of these every night, and they're the foundation of the learning. And children, when they're young, do billions of these to learn to move and walk and talk. And be it ever so microscopic, they know which one to go to next by size. And when we use these techniques, it flattens them out, so they don't do it automatically anymore. And when people learn to do that, we have to build new things on top of it so they can have shinier lives and get stuff done. Because living in the past is going backwards, and you can't go back in time so far. As physicists, we know that. And I know Einstein said possibly there'd be a way to time travel, but I believe it's mostly forward. And going backwards, how would that really help? You just, you're not going to go back and be 5 years old and start over again. That's not going to happen. Tomorrow is coming, and you should make it shinier and happier.